Leaden, sullen dark gray clouds appeared in the sky above the night city. Somewhere in the distance, lightning flashed. The drizzling rain quickly turned into a downpour, covering the entire surface of the nearby buildings with large drops. A strong wind began to blow. The lights were on in the 5-story building. Apparently someone still hadn't finished with their work for the day. There was no light in the hallway, only streetlights and the occasional rumbles of thunder seeping in from behind the ajar blinds. Droplets rattled loudly against the windows. At the end of the corridor was a double door made of dark oak. A man walked slowly toward it. He was sweating with excitement, drops of sweat rolling down his tired face. He looked to be about 40 years old, wearing a white shirt with a tie, a black suit, and black patent leather shoes on his feet. His hair was black and was cut short. He also wore round glasses with thin metal frames. A security pass hung around his neck. Staring tensely into the lens of the surveillance camera and keeping his hand in his right pocket, he said, "This is Sung Jin, a researcher working for the Ministry of Defense." He raised his hands up and held them at the level of his face. Sung Jin thought, "Who would have thought that there would come a time when I would be searched by people from state security? I guess this means that the project we are working on now is getting a lot of public attention." With his hands raised, he waited meekly for the search. 2 men dressed in strict suits approached him. One of them pulled out a metal detector. They first superficially searched him, patting his pockets with their hands, then the second man ran the metal detector all over Sung Jin's body. He waited patiently for the end of the mandatory procedures. The guard said, "He's clean, let him in." After which Sung Jin opened the office door. He was very anxious. His hair was disheveled. He frowned his eyebrows and creased his mouth. Kim entered the office where 3 people were already waiting for him. The office was huge. Up to 15 people could sit at the oval-shaped table. There were office chairs near each seat and bottles of water on the table for the visitors to the office. The walls were black marble with white flecks, and the floor was poured gray, cold concrete. There were no lights on in the room either, nor were there any in the hallway. Apparently, the cold street lights and the rolling thunder were enough. Sung Jin's heart was pounding frantically. He was breathing intermittently and swallowing nervously. There were 3 high-ranking employees sitting in the office. The president's brain, Professor Han Seok-T, was a man in his 50s. His face was slightly unshaven, his hair to the back of his head neatly styled with gel, with a strand of gray traced on his temple. The president's right-hand man, Captain Yang Jian, was looking sternly towards Sung Jin. His face already showed deep wrinkles, and his hair and eyebrows were completely gray. The man who created a government for 3, the creator of kings, Minister Jung Yol. He looked at Sung Jin spitefully, folding his hands together and placing them under his chin. He looked older than everyone else, expression wrinkles were all over his face, and his fashionable hairstyle was down. Sung Jin couldn't find a place to be while in this room. He needed to face them despite his fear. The men offered to get down to business. Kim was at first taken aback, but then quickly pulled himself together and agreed. He decided to start with a brief description of the situation. The source of the problem was discovered on July 3rd by the Sokcho Coast Guard in a restricted area. The Coast Guard, who began investigating the attacked ship. Kim couldn't finish. He was interrupted by Jung Yol. "Wait, enough descriptions. I heard you have a video. Let's start with it." Sung Jin adjusted his glasses and agreed with him. He turned on the projector and started the presentation. "We have never seen anything like this in the history of mankind. I present to you the video of the latest discovery. It was of poor quality, but it showed a ship at night and people in specialized clothing with protective helmets." Sung Jin clicked on it and the video started playing. What he saw shocked everyone in the room. Jung Yol's eyes bulged and froze. The other participants shrieked in horror, their faces contorted into frightened grimaces. Sung Jin continued his presentation. "Simply put, we decided to call them zombies. We named the project after the ship where it all began. 82-8. Zombie Apocalypse 82-8. A truly terrifying creature appeared on the screen. It was something resembling a starved man, but everything below the ribs was missing. Only the remaining vertebrae and thighs somehow kept the monster off balance. His skin was torn, all of his meat and organs lying on the floor. Holding onto the ladder, he was screaming at the ship's crew. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were missing a pupil, and they were drenched in blood. There was blood all over his mouth. Unsurprisingly, all the onlookers were horrified by what they saw. Sung Jin was the only one who kept his composure while talking about the horror. The action moves back 3 months. It was a warm summer. The blue sky was almost cloudless, cicadas were chirping outside, the sun was brightly lighting up the streets, casting glare off the windows. The small cafe had been rented for an important event. On the summer annex proudly hung a poster with the inscription, "Congratulations on joining the armed forces." The cafe itself was 1 story high and surrounded by lush trees and tall bamboo stalks. One of the tables displayed the typical menu of this establishment. In the middle was a fryer on which tteokbokki in a spicy sauce, small sausages made of rice dough, mushroom caps, onion rings, and a lot of herbs were sizzling appetizingly. There were also a lot of other dishes and appetizers on the table: spicy kimchi soup, pickled garlic, beans in hot sauce, fragrant meat broth, and green peppers. There were also glasses of beer and bottles of soju on the table. Each table was equipped with an exhaust hood. At this table sat a group of guys who were seeing their friend off to the army. One of them approached a cute waitress. She had a short haircut with bangs and was wearing a green company apron with a yellow polo. The young man asked her for a ginger ale. In the establishment, the news was on TV, and the anchor was telling the breaking news in a professional tone. There had been an explosion of great magnitude in a Russian border town. It was so big that the surrounding area caught fire. At a neighboring table sat a group that looked like a criminal gang. All the guys were of strong build, their arms were covered with tattoos. One of them was holding a shot glass and was being poured by the leader of their gang, a man named Mingu. He was dressed in a strict suit. He had a large scar on his right cheek. His bangs covered his right eye. From across the table, a cheer could be heard. "Thank you, big brother Mingu. I'm leaving, but I'll be back soon." One of the bandits said, "What are you doing? Why are you joining the army? If you were punished properly at school, this wouldn't have happened." "Right, brother." The shouting from the table continued. "We're ashamed. Make a toast, please. Hey, move." The noise from the bandits annoyed and disturbed the rest of the cafe's customers. And Kwang, the guy at the first table in the gray sweatshirt, was the most angry and annoyed. The men were disturbing him a lot, he said with anger. "Hey, why are they so proud of being gangsters? It's all too loud. Should we go and put them in their place?" His friend, a short guy with glasses and a black fox t-shirt, tried to calm him down and remind him that they were here to see a friend off to the army too. He besieged Kwang and calmly said, "Jin Woo is leaving for the army today. Don't pay any attention to them." A guy with shoulder-length hair tied into a small ponytail entered the dialogue, wearing a light green sports jacket. His name was Sam Shik. He was chewing on one of the many snacks, but that didn't stop him from continuing the conversation. "Yeah, if we make a mess, Jin Woo might be in trouble." Jin Woo didn't mind, he said excitedly. "Then he can't join the army." And Kwang thought about it and agreed with his comrades. I think we can't let that happen. We need to make sure Jin Woo goes." A guy with long hair and a sports coat decided to play a joke on Jin Woo. "Oh, right. Hey, Jin Woo, I heard that in the army they sometimes feed you feces while cleaning toilets. If something like that happens, just pretend to eat. Don't really eat." Jin Woo believed the stupid prank for a second. He even dropped the food he was holding with the metal chopsticks. Once he realized that it was just a joke, he said to Sam Shik, "Do we have to say something so disgusting while we're eating?" He wasn't even listening, because their favorite musical duo started playing on TV. Wow, it's Pink Punch. All the guys instantly forgot about everything and fanatically started watching their performance. Two girls named Tara and Jenny were shown on the screen. One of them was blonde with a short haircut. She wore a white t-shirt, a red miniskirt, and a pink cardigan. The second was a shade with long hair. She wore a wreath of snow-white lilies on her head. She wore a short black dress and a gray knitted cardigan. In front of them was a huge crowd of fans who held pink lanterns and thus illuminated the hall. The logo of the band Pink Punch itself was admired in the corner. They were sweetly singing a duet. "Ah, tell me you love me, kiss me on the lips. It would be better if it was you." Jin Woo tearfully looked at the screen, saluted and said, "Tara, Big Brother is leaving to pay his debt to the motherland. No, Big Brother will protect you." The long-haired guy was surprised that Jin Woo actually cried, and Kwang listened to all this and started to argue with them. Is Jin Woo blind? If you evaluate the face and body, Jenny is much better. The short guy with glasses irritatedly told him, "Tara has a much prettier face." And Kwang decided to mock him and picked his nose and said, "Well, I guess a lowlife like you can't understand the beauty of Jenny." These words made the bespectacled man even angrier. "What did you say?" And Kwang grabbed his friend's head under his arm and decided to ask another friend's opinion to settle the dispute. "Hey, Sam Shik, which one do you like better?" Sam Shik innocently smiled and chuckled while holding a sheet of salad with appetizers in his hand. "Me. I like both of them." The friends who were arguing were obviously unhappy with his answer because they couldn't solve the argument, so they both exclaimed in one voice, "Of course." Their discussion was interrupted by one of the gang members shouting from the other end of the establishment, "Oh, what are you doing? What are we going to do with the bros' clothes now?" A young waitress apparently accidentally spilled something on the shirt of the gang leader Mingu. His subordinate, a bald 2-meter-tall man, whose arms and chest were completely covered with black tattoos, they peeked out from under a white t-shirt, stepped in for him. The waitress immediately began to bow in guilt and apologized to the men. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll reimburse you for the laundry." This answer did not satisfy the bandit. "Hey, that's not enough. Pay for the moral damages." The waitress was confused, not realizing how she should do it. He perversely stuck out his tongue, looking down at the offending girl. How? Go sit down. He roughly grabbed her by the brush and tried to pull her somewhere. The girl fought back desperately, trying to break free from his grasp. Suddenly, someone's hand prevented the man from hurting the lady. It was Kwang. He firmly grabbed the bandit's hand, immobilizing her. The bald man asked in bewilderment, "What is this?" And Kwang ordered him to stop, for there were people here and he was disturbing them. The bandit was not impressed and slapped Kwang so hard that he couldn't stand on his feet at first. The man said threateningly, "Do you think you're in a movie? No, this is reality." He didn't have time to finish, and Kwang quickly regained his senses and struck back with his fist straight at the aggressor's stomach. There was no trace of the slap on his face. The bald man was knocked off his feet. He immediately fell to the tiled floor. He felt dizzy from the impact with the floor. His eyes rolled back. He began to sigh in terrible pain. Mingu drank soju from a shot glass. He silently cast a cold stare at the fallen subordinate. The other bandits who were watching the scuffle immediately stood up from the table and shouted angrily, "Bro." The toughest of them came from behind An Wang and said, "Hey, you. Do you even know what you just did?" He was a head taller than the guy. And Kwang grinned and said with feigned indifference, "What makes you think I care?" The whole gang started to prepare for the fight with the young man. They were already stretching their hands and crunching their knuckles. And Kwang tried to assess the situation in his head. Sam Shik said, "We don't need to help him, do we? He is a taekwondo master after all." The guy with glasses answered him, "It's Kwang, but dealing with gangsters alone can be hard." Jin Woo in the background exclaimed, "Hey, I thought today was my day." Mingu interrupted the fight by standing up from the table and said, "Enough. What are you doing to a child? This is humiliating." The whole crowd stared at him incomprehensibly. Suddenly he began to take off his jacket and tie, saying, "But, tooth for a tooth, right?" He stood up to face Kwang and said, "What's your last word, boy?" And Kwang smirked and replied, looking straight into Mingu's eyes, "Yes, there are a couple. My last words. Go away." He kicked his head towards Mingu with all his might, trying to kick him, but he was surprised to see that he easily dodged his blows. Not even a single muscle on his face flinched. Mingu firmly grabbed Kwang by the neck and pulled him down to the floor with his weight. He continued to hold him by the neck while preparing to hit him with his free hand. Time stopped for a second for Mingu. Just a fraction of an instant later, and Kwang interrupted his attack by lightning fast punching him back. Mingu managed to quickly dodge again, but what surprised him was that Kwang was able to swing while he was lying on his back. While Mingu was confused, the guy was able to break free from the hold and catch his balance. The enraged Mingu noticed the alcohol bottle on the table and grabbed it. He immediately assumed his usual appearance, a calm and cold-blooded face, and Kwang aggressively glared at him at this moment. The men prepared to attack each other again, each thinking in his head, "Last strike. With the next strike, I will end this." They both swung, but Mingu was faster. However, Kwang reacted quickly and managed to block the attack. If he hadn't, the bottle would have hit him right on his temple. Outside the window, a police car with its blinkers and sirens on was approaching. Apparently, someone had called the police at the beginning of the fight. The gang leader's subordinate, who had taken notice, turned to him, "Bro, the cops are here, let's get out of here." Mingu turned to him with his back to Kwang and said to him, "Don't let me see you again or I will kill you." In response, Kwang made an obscene gesture and said, "I'll kill you next time." His companions ran up to him and exclaimed, "Kwang, are you okay?" Jin Woo gloomed, realizing that he would have to serve in the army with these thugs. "Do I have to serve for sure?" Said he was fine, showing a thumbs up even though his nose was bleeding. The gang boss got into an expensive black foreign car. His driver asked him, "Bro, should I watch that guy?" Mingu stared out the window, pondering what had happened, and then replied, "No. If we're meant to meet again, I'm sure we will." At the end, he smirked contentedly. At this time, the group of friends had already arrived at the Nonsan training ground, the location of the Korean Ministry of Defense. Jin Woo thanked his comrades for coming all this way with him. They all began to hug him together and cheer him up. "Hang in there, okay? Don't lose your form." And Kwang even cried. Sam Shik decided to tease Jin Woo again. "Don't look for us, okay? I'm just kidding. We'll go to the ocean together on your vacation." And Kwang backed him up. "It'll be our gift. We'll make money for you." Jin Woo smiled happily, happy to have such great friends. "Sure, see you guys." Even though they gave their word, they never got to go to the ocean again. 3 months later, on the sea frontier of Sakcho, a few days before vacation, a storm was raging at sea. The waves shook the ship, dimly lit by lanterns. It was very dark at night. The moon was covered by dense clouds and so could not illuminate the ship's path in any way. A Coast Guard ship approached the unidentified vessel. The captain said into the loudspeaker, "Check. This is a warning. Korea Marine Police. Your vessel is trespassing into forbidden territory. This is a second warning. Have your captain come out and talk to us." The Coast Guard shone a bright spotlight on the strange vessel. It was rusty, some of the lights were burned out and no longer working. The vessel did not respond to police warnings. The vessel turned out to be the 82-8. One of the officers turned to the captain. What do we do? The boat seems to be empty. Should we detain him? They both stood at the edge of the ship and examined the unidentified vessel while holding onto the rail. The captain said that by law the boat had to be examined before detention. The officer accepted the order. They got as close to the boat as possible and threw small anchors on it so that the unidentified vessel would not go anywhere. Coast Guard personnel, dressed head to toe in special clothing, boarded the boat via a small boat launch. They also wore helmets with the Korean police symbol and each carried a weapon for self-defense. Over the radio they radioed the data so far available. This is the Navy. We are on an unknown boat. We've completed landing. Beginning search of the boat. Over. We're in. Doesn't look like anyone's been in here. Over. Officers began moving toward the storage compartment. Officer Kim removed his helmet to get a better look at the contents of the storage compartment. He pushed his helmet aside and said, "Where did this boat come from anyway?" Kim looked deep into the compartment, trying to see anything. He couldn't see anything in the pitch darkness, so he pulled out a flashlight. The coworkers asked, "Officer Kim, is there something in there?" He answered them, "No, there doesn't seem to be anything." Something was coming toward him, and he was trying to see anything that might be there. Suddenly this something noticed Kim and roared at him. Kim screamed in terror, drawing the attention of the other officers. They rushed to Kim's aid, trying to figure out what had just happened. They grabbed onto Kim, trying to pull him out, but they were unsuccessful. Kim's face and the back of his head were covered in blood that the other officers had gotten dirty in. They realized why they were having trouble getting Kim out of there. The zombie had sunk its teeth deeply into the guy's face, not letting go. Upon seeing the monster, the officers were shocked. "Officer Kim, what is it? Unhook it." No matter how hard they tried, the zombie wouldn't let go of Kim's flesh. It managed to wound his left eye. One of the officers ordered everyone to stand back. He swung the butt of his automatic rifle and hit the zombie with it. The zombie was thrown aside. This immobilized it for a while. Officer Kim howled in pain, grabbing his hands over his face, which was already half ripped off. The pain was horrible, and the other officers ran up to him and asked if he was okay. The fleet contacted the main ship. "Urgent. Urgent. This is a search party. We have encountered an unidentified threat. Open fire." One of the officers was already holding a weapon ready to shoot the zombie at any moment. The previously immobilized monster managed to get up. It turned to face the officers. The guy with the machine gun was stunned and trembled with terror, his whole face sweating. While he was in a daze, the zombie rushed toward him. His entire face was covered in the officer's blood. Kim, despite having no legs, he sprawled and tried to jump on the terrified officer. There was no one else in the sea besides the Coast Guard and the infected ship. The zombie sank its teeth into the officer's machine gun, who tried to defend himself with it. Another second and he would have been dead, but his comrade reacted in time and shot the zombie right in the head. He fell dead. Before he could do any damage to the others, he was thrown aside. There was smoke coming from the muzzle of the gun after the shot. The frightened officer never realized what had happened. His whole life flashed before his eyes. The question of the comrade who saved him brought the officer to his senses. "Are you all right?" Thank God, he was fine. From the radio came the captain's voice. "Search party, this is the main vessel. We heard gunfire." The officer looked worriedly toward the radio. The front answered them, "Yes, that was us firing." Over. The officers examined the breathless zombie, one of them helping Kim to his feet, their silhouettes illuminated by the light of the main lantern. The men spoke out of desperation. "What was that? How do we explain it?" "I don't know. Let's try." One of the officers asked, "Officer Kim, are you okay?" Another colleague replied instead of Kim, "He has a deep wound on his face." The guy suggested we slowly go back and asked to call the main ship and report that they had an injured man. He turned around worriedly and said, "Officer Kim, please hold on a little longer." But Kim didn't answer him. His entire skin had taken on a cadaverous hue. His pupils were gone. He bit his comrade's palm, ripping it off, then began attacking the other officers. The infected officer then attacked the camera operator, who desperately defended himself. All the horror that was going on was recorded on video, which Sung-jin showed. At this point, the camera recording ended and the projector in the office turned off. Jung-yeol asked, "Did you find out what kind of boat it was?" Sung-jin answered him, "It was an unregistered boat, so it is unknown where it came from. But considering its condition, we don't think it was on the road for very long." Jung-yeol continued, "Moreover, what's scary is that something on the recording can move even when it's missing half of its body. Is it definitely a human being?" The zombie's body was sent to forensics immediately after the incident, where it was examined by criminal surgeons. Sung-jin reported on it. Yes, the experts examined it. According to the results of the examination, it was found that the creature's internal organs, at least what was left of them, were no different from human organs. But the hemoglobin activity was different. Humans have an average of 12 to 17, while this creature had an average of 0.3. Yang Jian waved him away and said, "Down with complicated terms, keep it simple." A worried Sung Jin replied, "Well, to put it simply, this creature's blood does not drive oxygen through the body." This answer shocked the people in the audience. He continued, "So, the body soon begins to function independently of the heart and lungs." Han Seok-ti listened to him carefully and with a bored face suggested, "This could be useful. You just need to aim for the heart and lungs before they go into that state. Let's start with the lungs. That should be effective." Jun Yol grinned and said, "It seems we have stumbled upon some very valuable information." He added, "Judging from the videotape, we definitely have something to fear. Has your research on how they can harm us progressed in any way?" Sung Jin swallowed nervously and replied, "Yes, there are advances, but there are still many things to be studied. For example, the virus itself." Han Seok-ti clarified, "And the way it spreads." Sung Jin corrected his glasses and then answered about that. "These are still initial findings, but it seems that the virus is transmitted through open wounds. That's how the zombie virus can enter a person's body." Seok-ti digested this information after which replied, So the wound must be deep for the virus to be transmitted. Is it like AIDS or worse? What if it's the other way around? What happens if a person bites or eats a zombie?" He threw a frantic look towards the uncomprehending Sung Jin. The latter guiltily answered him that they haven't studied the matter yet. Han Seok-ti thumped his hand on the table loudly, resenting how they could have forgotten about such a thing. He said that even if his subordinates forgot about it, he needed to remember it. Jun Yol asked him to calm down, because they have an example, so the research will be quick. He also asked Professor Kim if he could report back to them on the results on this matter within a week. He meekly lowered his head and said he would try, while thinking in his head, "I'm going crazy. Who can even do that? I can't even say no to him." One of them said, "Now to business. Is everything ready?" Kim looked at his watch and confirmed that he was ready. He asked everyone, in that case, to turn to the black wall behind them. The marble wall began to move apart, a bright light began to illuminate the room. The high-ranking people turned around in shock, horrified at the sight before them. They all exclaimed in surprise when they saw what was behind the marble black wall in their office. Behind the wall was a huge room with white tiled walls, enclosed by glass. All the glass was covered in blood, and in the room were the infected officers from the ship where the zombies were first discovered. They saw the people in the office and abruptly rushed towards them, growling loudly. All of their faces covered in blood, all of them had missing pupils in their eyes. They looked like walking corpses. The zombies began to bang their fists on the glass in a frenzy, bashing their heads in hopes of eating human flesh. Han Seok-ti, Jun Yol, and Yang Jian looked nervously at what was happening behind the glass and swallowed loudly. Sung Jin softly tapped on the bloody glass and said, "This is 15-centimeter acrylic glass. The oxygen level in the chamber is less than 10%. That's less than half of the air you and I normally breathe." He frowned and turned to the glass where the zombie was bashing its head and leaving new bloody footprints, then added, "They can function with virtually no oxygen and feel no pain." Another zombie smashed its fists into the barrier in the meat. Yang Jian rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He replied to Sung Jin, "It's certainly good, but it doesn't look like they are intelligent. They were officers, so they should be smarter than average people. Can they shoot?" Sung Jin replied that he doubted it. Yang Jian continued, "So, even if they can't shoot, we know they're not easy to deal with. Have you done any simulations?" Professor Kim said, "Yes, in an uninfected city, we simulated the introduction of the virus and determined what would happen within 24 hours. If the population of the city is 100,000 or less, after 24 hours only 2% of the population will be infected. After 2 days, the number will rise to 17%, and after 3 days, it will rise to 34%. Han Seok-ti said in response to this, "Judging from the way the curve swings within 3 days, I think that's when people start to realize how to confront zombies. Information and instructions need to be disseminated." He was silent for a moment, then asked, "What about the megacities?" Sung Jin told him that they ran similar simulations for 24 hours, 2 days, and 3 days. The infection rate was 47% in 24 hours, 64% in 2 days, and 70% in 3 days. He showed a demonstration of this simulation. The city was in shambles. The corpses of infected people who would soon turn into zombies were lying everywhere. There were numerous explosions and fires, cars on the roads were overturned, there were many police cars in the city, and military helicopters were flying in the sky. Survivors tried to escape the crowds of zombies, but not everyone was successful. There are 2 reasons for this rapid spread compared to smaller cities. First of all, the population density is greater by about 50 more people compared to small towns. Secondly, in big cities, people travel a distance of about 20 kilometers every day. Jun Yol asked his colleague's opinion, "What do you think?" Is there anything we can do to utilize this information? Yang Jian answered him waggishly, it would be terrible to lose 50% of the population before we even start taking countermeasures on the zombie issue. We won't be able to focus on the starting line because we'll be too busy getting rid of those creatures, let alone maintaining a military strategy. Han Seok-T said, it looks like it could be a strategic weapon that would exceed even nuclear weapons in power, depending on how it is used. Jung Yol asked about the known weaknesses of zombies. Professor Sung Jin said, they do not show reactions to any stimuli, and wounds or scars do not affect them in any way. However, once their brain is damaged, they completely stop their actions at all costs. They are also unable to move in temperatures below -55 Celsius. Zombies in such an environment are covered in a crust of ice and their eyes are covered. Jung Yol thought about the professor's words and then came up with this thought, they stop moving at -55 degrees Celsius, and if it is higher, they start moving again. So we can control them in this way. Sung Jin was even confused by his words at first and then hesitantly told him, well, in general, yes. But as you can see from the video, there are things we need to consider about contamination and so on. The minister said without even listening to the professor's arguments, 2 years. I give you exactly 2 years. The man was dumbfounded, mouth ajar in astonishment. He had not expected such an answer. Minister Jung leaned his hand against the glass, right behind which a zombie was staring hungrily at him. Sung Jin nervously asked him if he really meant it, to which Jung Yol said, I will give you any material help you need. But I want you to create a vaccine that prevents these mutations and infections in these 2 years. The crowd of zombies in the room behind the minister was trying to get out. They were hitting the glass threateningly, and it felt as if they were about to break the acrylic wall, despite being 15 centimeters thick. Sung Jin left the building, got into a truck and drove away. The road was empty, there were only 4 cars and 1 small truck. It was dangerous to drive in this weather, the roads were very wet, but there was no choice. The professor sat in the front seat next to his driver. He clutched his head, wondering if he had done the right thing, if he had made it through. He didn't know the answer to these questions. The minister's words were rolling around in his head, as soon as we invent a vaccine for the virus, we plan to start distributing it to every corner of the world. And once we tell the public about the vaccine, I don't need to explain to you how much power and money we will gain, do I? Sung Jin tried to stay calm. Okay, don't worry so much. This opportunity doesn't come along every day. The cars were speeding down the highway, but no one noticed the spikes placed along all the lanes. The first to hit the spiked lane was the truck in which the professor was traveling. Its spikes burst, causing it to skid. Before they realized what had happened, all the cars behind them braked sharply, avoiding the collision. On the other side were expensive black foreign cars. Someone got out of one of them and lit a cigarette. Behind him, people also started to get out of other cars. They were all dressed in strict suits, holding weapons in their hands, bats, metal pipes, and so on. The smoking man turned out to be Min Gu, the head of the Man Corporation who had organized the scuffle at the cafe for the army's future soldiers. In the couple minutes of being outside, he had managed to get soaked to the skin. He looked around and said, it's quite rainy today, so let's hurry up and get this over with. At this time, Jin Woo was writing a letter to his friends while in the barracks. The room was a bright room designed for several people. Each had their own locker and sleeping space. They had a large window with a downpour behind it. Also, there was a TV and a fan in the room. Jin Woo started writing a letter. Hey guys, how are you guys doing? I'm doing well here. I thought the 4 of us would always be together, but it's been like 3 months since we've been separated because of my enlistment in the army. He was distracted by a picture on the table of the 4 of them at a construction site, and Kwang looked annoyed. Yu Bin was smiling mischievously, and they were both wearing overalls. Sam Shik and Jin Woo were posing next to them, the last construction site captioned in the corner. Jin Woo continued writing the letter. How are you guys doing? I think Yu Bin is having a hard time because of the flashy and Kwang and the dodgy Sam Shik. Jin Woo chuckled as he wrote this. He continued, but I'm still curious how you guys are doing. Oh, by the way, I've been promoted to special shooter. Yesterday I hit 20 targets at 250 meters in front of the commander. Even if I told you, you probably wouldn't understand how cool that is, right? Well, I'll save the details for when I see you on vacation. That's all for now. P.S. 1. Yu Bin, Jenny on the pink punch photo shoot looks incredible. I feel bad. I feel like I'm betraying Tara, but I learned in the army that beautiful girls are better. 2. If you change the construction site, let me know. Jin Woo finished writing the letter. On his desk, besides the letter and the picture, he had an erotic magazine on his desk, with Jenny from their favorite band Pink Punch on the cover. She was wearing a striped bikini in white and red colors, with a cute straw hat on her head. The guy folded the letter in half, watching the downpour. On the highway where Min-gu and his group were, events were picking up. Sung Jin asked the driver what happened to the car. He said, it looks like something got stuck in the tire. I'll get out and check it out. He left the truck, taking a flashlight with him, starting to look around the road. The driver noticed something and muttered to himself, "Is this a trap? What's the problem?" Sung Jin got scared and thought, "Don't tell me. The car is on target." The driver was about to say something to the professor, but he didn't have time. He was hit on the head by the bandit, thus stunning him. Blood flowed from the back of his head and he began to fall on the wet road. He was silently watched by a smoking Mingu. He finished his cigarette and said to his subordinates, "Gather your things, organize the rest." All the armed bandits rushed to attack. One of them even had a bat with nails. If you get hit on the head with such a bat, the chances of survival are nil. The contestants scattered all over the highway. One of them swung the bat at the tinted window of someone's car. The passenger got scared and screamed. The bandits continued beating the uncomprehending people, not sparing them at all. They were hit in the face with heavy bats and metal pipes. Apparently, these were high-ranking officials who were also involved in dealing with the zombies. Someone among the gangsters voiced an order, "Beat them. Take them down before they get their guns out. Killing can be done, so just attack." Blood splashes mixed with the water from the downpour on the asphalt. The highway turned into a battlefield. Some attacked without weapons. They just punched the poor people in the face with their fists. One of the victims of the attack said, "They are not like ordinary bandits." He got out of the car to assess the situation and turned to his subordinate, "You request reinforcements from headquarters, and the rest of you get ready to shoot." The young man accepted the order, started to take the phone out of his pocket, but had no time to do anything. Someone threw a sharp steel dagger and hit the guy right in the head. He fell dead. Mingu stealthily made his way through the downpour and the crowd to the man asking for backup. The man didn't notice anything. He was in shock and despair after killing his subordinate. Mingu swung his fist in cold blood. His expression didn't even change. He punched the man right on his jaw, breaking it and knocking out several teeth. From that blow, the man lost consciousness. Someone called out to Mingu, and he looked up with a bored face to see what was going on. The people from the government had already pulled out their pistols. They were shooting back at the bandits as best they could, trying to keep themselves and their colleagues alive. Mingu quickly rushed to the side. To avoid being hit by the barrage of bullets, he grabbed the breathless body and cynically used it as his shield. All the bullets hit the poor guy's back. The gunmen stopped. They couldn't believe that he was so shameless that he even used the corpse of their colleague. What a sicko. In some car sat a middle-aged man with a short beard and an expensive emerald-colored scarf from a famous design house. He was watching the ringleader in amazement. "Anyway, this crazy Mingu is fearless. I would give him credit. Look at him bouncing between bullets. He's on fire. He's really on fire." His colleague in the blue suit sullenly looked towards Mingu and didn't answer him at first. The man turned around after a couple seconds of thinking and sternly said to him, "Boss, but how important is it for you to intervene personally?" The boss took out a cigarette and a lighter and said before lighting it, "You know Chairman H. Wang of Tian Corporation, right? His secretary came by yesterday. He said to protect the item in the truck by all means." He pointed to the truck in which Sung Jin and his driver were riding. The man didn't expect this and wondered, "Chairman H. Wang, the leader of Tian Corporation. He is one of the most influential business people in South Korea and the main patron of Man Corporation, which he brought to the national level. If it were not for the substantial support of Tian Corporation, Man Corporation might not even exist." Who could have imagined that Chairman H. Wang would give such an order? He pictured him in his mind as a mysterious man standing in front of a huge panoramic window and surrounded by a pile of 50,000 won bills. It was as if the entire city was in the palm of his hand. He could have anything he wanted. The introduction made his face sweat as the boss behind him laughed. The man in the blue suit excitedly asked him, "What could be the thing there that he's going so far?" The boss only winked playfully and told him without letting the cigarette out of his mouth, "Well, does it really matter? We're just following orders and collecting money. No need to dig any deeper." He only meekly agreed with him and didn't ask any more unnecessary questions. Finishing his cigarette, the boss continued to watch the scene on the highway and thought, the emperor of the business world ordered the emperor of the night to get something. Just fascinating. Mingu's subordinates reported that they were ready and seized the truck. Mingu himself coldly looked at them and emotionlessly said, "Good. Thank you for your work. Let me check it out." Large drops of rain pounded on the roof of the truck. It didn't even think of stopping. The bandits with dumbfounded faces turned to Mingu again. "Boss, the truck is unusual, isn't it? If we knew the password was needed here, we would have left at least one alive. Transfer the cargo to another truck." The door of the truck has a really complicated system of locks and cipher on the door, which is hard to break. Mingu assessed the situation and said, "No, you don't. If there is a location tracking device, it will just give us away." Someone interrupted him and called out. The subordinate said there was someone hiding in the front seat of the truck. He was holding the neck of Sung Jin, who had miraculously managed to stay unharmed during the gunfire and carnage. He was scared out of his wits. "Please have mercy. I don't know anything. Please let me go." He was all shaken up. He was pushed to the pavement, and Sung Jin was immediately surrounded by members of the Man Corporation. Min-gu looked down at him and said, "You whine too much." The others shouted at him, "Are you an agent? Hey, open the truck." The bald man saw something fall out of Professor Kim's pocket and said to Min-gu, "Boss, I think we can get him to talk. He's from the Defense Research Institute." Sung-jin. A pass fell out of his pocket with all the information written on it and his photo attached. Min-gu grabbed Sung-jin by the back of his head and looked at him threateningly. The unfortunate professor could only stare fearfully into his eyes. Min-gu asked in a cold tone, "Hey, what's the password for the truck?" Sung-jin answered him in a trembling voice, scared out of his wits, I don't know. It's a state secret known only to agents." Min-gu's nerves began to gradually give up, and he irritably interjected, "A state secret." Sung-jin confirmed it with a trembling voice. Min-gu decided not to be ceremonious and took out a knife and slashed the professor's cheek with it. The blood splattered all over the place. There was a deep cut on Sung-jin's face. His entire face was covered in blood, and blood even got into his mouth. He let out a loud howl due to the unbearable pain, crouched down and grabbed the wound with his hands. Min-gu was mocking him. "Let me ask again, what's the password?" Sung-jin's eyes squinted in pain. He mumbled exhaustedly, "Please let go. Please." Min-gu pressed close to him and put the knife to the other cheek of the poor guy. "Password. You really don't know it." Sung-jin could hardly stand on his feet. He was insanely afraid of getting hit in the face by the sharp blade once again. He started to say, "Don't open the door," inside. He didn't have time to finish. Min-gu slashed so hard on Professor Sung-jin's wounded face that his thin glasses flew off. He didn't care about the horrible pain the unfortunate man was experiencing. What he cared about was getting the contents of the back of the truck. Sung-jin was experiencing the most real agony. His entire face was covered in blood. It even got into his eyes. His entire shirt was drenched in purple drops of blood. He sank to his knees, no longer having the strength to stand on his feet. Sung-jin grabbed the wounded parts of his face with both hands, and then, shaking panically, said in a suppressed voice, "Please, don't go to the van after what happened there. It's too dangerous. You won't be able to handle it." Min-gu cast a cold and indifferent glance at him and answered him, "Instead of worrying about others, I think you'd better take care of your own life. I'll warn you right away, you better not expect an easy death from me." Sung-jin raised his gaze to the calm Min-gu. In the reflection of his brown eyes, Min-gu looked fierce and cruel despite the mask of an emotionless face. Sung-jin didn't want to die, but he couldn't reveal the secret of the state either. He weighed everything in his head and realized that life was more precious to him. He intermittently told them the password, 60,601,864. The subordinate went to check whether the professor had tricked them and whether the code would fit or not. The boss only looked at him briefly, ignoring the raindrops running down his face. To the surprise of everyone present, the password did indeed fit the lock on the truck and its door opened. Someone called out loudly to Min-gu. Everyone turned around at the speaker. It turned out to be the man in the blue suit who had previously inquired about what was in the truck. The subordinates lined up around him in a makeshift corridor and humbly bowed to him. He shouted to Min-gu, "Gad, what are you standing there for? Are you waiting for me?" The corporate member who was opening the door tried to tell him, "No, 1 second, Bart, we." Before he could finish, Min-gu took his hand back and placed it on the guy's stomach, telling him to shut up. The guy looked down guiltily and shut up. The man in the blue suit took a stern look at Min-gu, walked past him and said, "Min-gu, let's try our best, okay? You won't do anything without me anyway." The subordinate, still bowing, irritatedly looked in his direction and thought, "Geez, creep number 2. I hear he always jumps into the bushes in danger and only comes out at times like this when the danger has passed." The man in the blue suit abruptly opened the doors of the truck, revealing the contents to everyone nearby. He exclaimed happily. In the back of the truck was a cooling system, ventilation, and ultraviolet light fixtures. But the most important thing, there was 4 armored freezers with a temperature mark of -55 degrees Celsius. It was at that temperature that zombies would stop moving and come to a complete halt. The man in the blue suit was going over his boss's words in his head as he lit a cigarette. He said that it was necessary to protect the contents of the truck with every possible means. He thought, what is inside that even the National Intelligence Service was ordered to guard? If someone high up like Chairman H. Wang was interested in this, it was definitely something out of the ordinary. Whatever it was better to find out, and not regret it later. He stepped into the cool body with excitement, breathing in the sterile air. He looked at the equipment inside with interest, not even realizing that the freezers contained the living dead. The truck was too cold for him. He was surprised by it. He realized that there was something in the freezers. The sudden drop in temperature created steam, which he pushed away with his hands. He pulled out his smartphone and turned on his flashlight, trying to see the contents of the freezers, but he wasn't prepared for what he saw. His face was a picture of primal horror. He saw a zombie whose skin had turned blue and crusted with ice from the low temperature. He thought it was just a corpse, not realizing the magnitude of the situation. Steam began to emanate from the zombie. He looked apprehensively at the other boxes and thought, don't tell me the other freezers have them too. The air conditioning system was on full blast and humming and buzzing loudly. The man opened the remaining freezers, and there, too, he found zombies, which he still took for regular corpses. He looked at them strangely and thought, crazy. Why would they transport corpses so carefully? And why would Chairman H. Wang arrange something like this? Wait, this is Chairman H. Wang. He's not going to want the most ordinary corpses, is he? He had hot steam coming out of his mouth. He began to examine the faces of the zombies more closely. Wow, is that human skin, or is it just ordinary rags? Are these some kind of animal bites? Even their mother wouldn't recognize them in this state. His subordinate loudly tapped on the truck door and shouted, "Boss, we have to hurry." He rudely shouted back at him, "Wait a minute. Don't you know we're dead if we mess up? Stop it." He was leisurely looking at the contents of the freezers when suddenly he heard a strange noise behind him. He turned around in horror and saw what he least expected to see. As the temperature in the freezer itself is higher than -55 degrees, the zombies began to regain their ability to move. One of the walking dead was moving right at him. Only now did he realize that they weren't corpses at all. His face was sweating with excitement. Since zombies have minimal moisture in their bodies, their skin shrank and seemed to stick to their bones. The zombie that was walking towards the man was missing the skin on his cheek, peering through rotted muscles. It growled muffledly and, barely moving its legs, gradually approached him. The man said, "I knew it. This is no ordinary corpse. Is this some kind of advanced cryogenic technology?" A cold vapor filled the entire room. The zombie abruptly lurched forward, roaring even louder. The man staggered back and swore, the zombie almost knocking him down. He swung his hand with his smartphone and shouted, "Whatever it is, they're finished if they decide to contact me." He punched the disfigured face of the zombie with all his might, stopping it briefly. The dead man whimpered loudly, though he felt no pain. The boss punched so hard that the zombie's head bled, staining the floor in the man's hand. He began to brave it, breathing loudly, "How's that, zombie? I'm Sun Ho, number 2 in the Man Corporation." Sun Ho. What? He couldn't finish. A second zombie crawled up to him stealthily and gnawed deeply into his left leg. It bit through the pant leg of his suit, reaching the bone. Sun Ho shrieked shrilly, trying to shake the tightly clawed zombie off his leg, kicking it on the head. But he failed to appreciate the whole situation. The remaining zombies, which he had actually released himself, had already regained their motor functions and were getting closer and closer to Sun Ho until he felt that the situation had become hopeless. The rest of his colleagues and subordinates were still waiting for him outside, the downpour continuing to drip. Min-gu took out a pack of cigarettes. A young subordinate asked him, "Boss, it seems like he's taking too long. Should we go and check on him?" As soon as he noticed that the boss wanted a smoke, he quickly took out a lighter and offered to light the cigarette. Min-gu replied to him, "Yeah, forget it. Why just make trouble for yourself? Let him sit there." They heard a noise from the truck that sounded like muffled shouts and thumps. Min-gu turned around and glanced over his shoulder with interest. The subordinates started banging on the doors of the truck, asking what happened to Sun Ho. They decided to let him out, thinking he was in danger. The bald man opened the doors, calling out to him. All the bandits saw what was going on in there and were dumbfounded. They froze for a second as they saw what was happening. Sun Ho was mercilessly gnawing on the zombies from all sides. The bald man rushed as fast as he could towards the boss, cursing loudly. He kicked one of the zombies in the head with all his might, snapping its neck. Then, he pulled out a sharp kitchen knife from the inside pocket of his jacket. He simultaneously pushed the zombies away from him and tried to stab them with the knife. He shouted to the others, baring his teeth, "What are you standing there for? Get the boss out quickly." They just stood there with puzzled faces and couldn't even say a word to him. They couldn't move. While the bald man was trying to shout to them, another zombie came up from behind and bit him on his left shoulder, splashing scarlet blood on his face. A crunch of bones was heard. It seemed to have broken his collarbone. The bald man howled in terrible pain and screamed, "Ah, what is this? I hit his vital organs." The zombie only bit deeper into his flesh. The man began to lose consciousness, his eyes beginning to roll back as the zombie ate him. The subordinates were stunned and watched in horror as their colleague died. The remaining zombies began to burst outward from the back of the truck, finding themselves free. Min-gu ordered everyone to carry weapons. He furrowed his eyebrows and thought, Sun Ho. He might be unlucky, but he is not the kind of person who gives up so quickly. What kind of strange creatures are these? Whoever they are, if they messed with our organization, they will die. The zombies had already started eating Min-gu's subordinates. They were desperately asking for his help. The others didn't realize who it was. They watched the killing of their colleagues and didn't understand anything. Some thought it was just cannibals, while others didn't even know what to do. Min-gu pushed everyone out of his way and ordered them to let him pass forward. He stepped his foot into a deep puddle, soaking his expensive black leather shoes, but it didn't bother him in the slightest. He glanced at the zombie that was mercilessly eating his subordinate. The latter looked up at him. Ninggu took out his knife that he had used to cut Sungjin's face and stabbed the neck of the living dead with all his might. Blood splattered all over the road, mixing with the rainwater. He looked at the zombie in shock. This non-human. Is he continuing with a torn throat? The zombie, despite the deep wound, did not stop and continue to eat the already dead subordinate of Man Corporation. It bit into his cheeks and the rest of his face. Ninggu gripped the knife hilt tighter and said, "How disrespectful." In just a second, he severed the zombie's head. It flew onto the road, and blood gushed out of its neck. Ninggu watched silently as the head rolled on the wet asphalt. Someone shouted to him, "Boss, behind you." Ninggu hesitated for a second, then quickly reacted and turned around. There were two distraught zombies running at him, desperately trying to attack him. He kicked them with all his might, causing them to fly several meters forward. Ninggu wondered in confusion, how can you move like that even after being stabbed several times? The zombie quickly recovered and swooped at Ninggu again. He swung his hand, grabbed the zombie's hair from its head and slammed it against the ground, breaking its neck. He shouted, "What are you doing? Why aren't they dying? Whoever you are, this sort of thing is very annoying." He raised his gaze full of calm and saw another zombie heading in his direction through the heavy downpour. Ninggu grabbed his forehead and laughed, "Aha, very interesting creatures. It's useless to even fight with them with a knife." He raised his head and looked at them puzzled. How do they die then, thought Ninggu. But then he remembered that the decapitated zombie didn't attack them anymore. Ninggu thought of hitting them in the head to immobilize them. The other zombie opened its mouth wide and wailed loudly. Ninggu viciously stabbed at its throat, inserting the knife as deep as possible. The zombie howled, then twitched forward violently, almost biting Ninggu on the head. He thought, if I had stabbed him a little later, I would have been dead by now. He quickly jumped away from the zombie that had slammed him to the ground, knocking it aside. He sarcastically said towards the zombie, "Looks like you guys have broken bones." The zombie quickly stood up and tried to attack Ninggu, but he kicked it in the head, stomping its skull into the ground. Ninggu irritatedly said, "Ha, you don't even die from something like this. They all can't die." But suddenly, he noticed that the zombie with the crushed skull had stopped moving. Ninggu exhaled in exhaustion, then came up with a thought that might help him fight. He crouched down on one knee to get a closer look at the zombie and said, "Now I see. So, you need to open the skull, don't you?" He emotionlessly pulled the knife out of the zombie's throat. At this time, another living dead man attacked him. Ninggu quickly bounced off and tripped the zombie, kicking it in the other leg in the process. It fell down, losing its balance. Ninggu picked up the metal pipe from the ground, threw it on his shoulders and said, "I see. Despite appearances, you guys are quite loyal. All your friends are dead, but you don't seem to be the least bit afraid. Well, for that, you deserve respect." The fallen zombie quickly got to its feet and ran at Ninggu again. He immediately hit the pipe on its head. A deafening ringing sound was heard. The zombie's leg was twisted and it fell down. But despite this, it continued to roar and attack Ninggu. The latter successfully repelled all the attacks and continued to hit it with the pipe. Finally, the zombie stopped moving. It fell down on the road and didn't move for a while. Ninggu was already preparing to crush its head and said, "You should have made your decisions more carefully." But the zombie suddenly twitched, much to Ninggu's surprise. "This thing is still moving. I broke its neck. What else is there to do?" Ninggu swung the pipe harder and said, "I admire your persistence, I really do. But this is the end." He was about to hit him on the head when he heard someone shouting, "Stop! Stop right now." An expensive car drove up to him and started blinding him with its headlights. Ninggu shielded himself from the bright light, scrutinizing the car. The one shouting was a man wearing a green scarf who was traveling in the same car as Sunho. He said to Ninggu, "Hey, I see you have a lot of energy, but you can't destroy everything. Leave at least one, otherwise we won't get the reward." Ninggu first looked at him and then at what was happening nearby on the road. Two guys were helping each other stand up. One says to the other, "Is this thing really a person? I thought I was watching a horror movie." The second guy answers him, "Don't fuss, you've just been bitten on the arm." The corpses of subordinates who couldn't survive the attack were lying next to them. Ninggu gripped the metal pipe harder. "Hang," the man in the green scarf irritably said to him. "Hey, Ninggu, are you planning to pay me?" "Seriously?" Ninggu answered him in a rude tone. "Hang, do what you want. I have to take care of my subordinates." He turned away and walked in the other direction. Hang shouted after him, "Hey, what kind of tone is that? Hey, Ninggu, he can't hear me. Okay, I think that kind of persistence is his forte. Hey guys, get the body out of here." Ninggu left it over there on the road. "We need to meet Chairman Hwang." The subordinates tied up the zombie and threw him in the trunk. He was twitching, hitting the wall and screaming. The subordinate said, "Oh my god, are these really people? If it wasn't for the boss's orders, I would have thrown him in the river. Thank your luck." He looked at the zombie in disgust and slammed the trunk shut. H-Wang was holding some kind of ring in his hand and rubbing it. He asked, "What happened to Mr. Choi?" His body was loaded into another car. The people answered H-Wang, "He is unconscious because he lost a lot of blood." His whole face was covered in blood, his clothes were torn and stained, and his veins were starting to gradually darken. H-Wang tisked and said he was foolish to decide to act on his own. Take him to the hospital. The subordinates obeyed his order. A short-shaven man with a scar on his left cheek approached H-Wang and said, "Boss, I've loaded everything." The man continued to sit back in the car and answered him, "Okay, let's go. Tell the others to clean up the place." The man with the scar answered him that they would. Some cars began to leave the scene. A subordinate spoke to Mingu, "The boss is such a fool." The subordinate asked why. He indignantly replied to Mingu, "So many of our family members are dead and injured, and he only cares about the reward." Kang only looked at him tiredly and said, "Stop talking nonsense and start cleaning up. Move our bodies into the car and the rest into the truck and set it on fire." There was nothing left for him to do but follow the order. Mingu put his hand on his shoulder and said, "And when we're done with all this, let's have a drink with ours, in honor of our fallen family members." The subordinate looked at him with his mouth wide open and let out bitter tears that were almost invisible due to the incessant rain. Someone shouted, "Mingu, brother, this dude is here and he's still alive." They both turned around at the approaching silhouette. He was moving his feet heavily, stomping loudly through the deep puddles. The subordinate was beyond excited. In this silhouette he recognized his friend Sik. He happily exclaimed and ran towards him. Mingu thought his movements seemed strange. But how? The kid went to hug Sik with the words, "Bro, I thought you were dead. Let's go to the hospital, they'll fix you up in no time." He took his hand and led him behind him. Mingu realized that something was wrong and shouted at him, "Get away from him." The Sik was turned into a zombie. He bit the poor guy's neck before he could even realize anything. He howled in horror and pain when he realized that his friend had attacked him. The other subordinates saw this and shouted, "What's going on?" He bit Chil Sung. Mingu ordered everyone to step back. He sprinted around and kicked the Sik's zombie knee with all his might. The flesh on his face crumpled and his jaw crunched. He released Chil Sung from his grip and roared loudly. Mingu thought, "This guy. He has become one of those monsters. What's going on? Is it contagious?" Chil Sung also turned into a zombie and rose to his feet. The bandits shouted, "Bro, the guy who died. Bro, they're all rising from the dead. This one too. Bro, what kind of creatures are they?" They all looked around and realized that the previously dead family members had risen to their feet, their faces no longer resembling human faces. Mingu didn't understand what had happened to them. A mob of zombies surrounded the survivors and started snarling at them. All the living dead ran towards them at once, unable to see any obstacles in front of them. For the first time that evening, Mingu felt the most real fear and hopelessness. He shouted to the surviving family members, "Everyone get in the car quickly. Let's get out of here. Run." The downpour was getting heavier and heavier by the minute. If it wasn't for the street lights, the whole road would have been covered in darkness. Mingu listened to the shouts of his subordinates, "Out of the road. There are too many of them, brother. Over here." A subordinate of his drove up to him, asking him to get in. They were just about to drive away from this cursed place when they saw a horrifying picture in front of the windshield. A very young family member was being gnawed by 3 zombies, who used to be Mingu's subordinates. The poor man was screaming at them, "Help me. Please take me with you. I beg you, please." There was almost no life left of him and he would soon turn into a zombie. Mingu looked at him bitterly, but realized they couldn't help him and ordered the drivers to get out of here. They sped down the highway, the car skidding every now and then due to the wet road and high speed. Suddenly a zombie, also former family members, jumped out in front of them. They tried their best to stop the car and kill the survivors. Mingu ordered them not to slow down. He said to crush them and run them down. The terrified driver obeyed him. The zombies started bouncing off the hood of the car. But the worst was ahead, because one of them jumped on the hood and broke the glass. The driver's face turned into a terrified grimace, and he squealed shrilly. The zombie shattered the glass all the way through. It began to burst into the interior of the car. The driver swore and was confused, but Mingu ordered him not to stop and to drive even faster. The car was rushing down the highway, just a little more and it seemed as if it would fly off the road because of the rain. The speedometer arrow showed the maximum speed. The driver pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The car began to skid more and more. It spun in place. The zombie almost sneaked into the cabin. He grabbed the driver's face with his hands, causing him to lose control of the vehicle. Mingu yelled to him, "Hey, hey, can't you see that building up ahead? Turn the wheel." Turned. It was too late. They crashed into the concrete fence of the house. If Mingu wasn't wearing a seatbelt, he wouldn't have survived the crash. The hood of the car burst into flames, starting a massive fire. Not even a heavy downpour can put it out. The airbags in the car activated, but despite that, Mingu hit his head hard. He coughed and grunted in pain. His driver along with the zombies flew out onto the roadway, the driver unable to survive the collision. Mingu's shoulder was hurting badly. He wondered how he would get out of here and if it was possible. He took off his seatbelt and started to slowly climb out of the burning car, all injured. There was blood running down his face. He turned around and looked at the car. It had exploded. Mingu started to slowly walk forward and saw 3 silhouettes moving unnaturally at the end of the road. He said tiredly, "Oh, of course. All right, we'll have to fight them." He reached into the back pocket of his pants for his knife but didn't find it there. He panicked. "My knife. Where did I put my knife? Right? I can't believe I left it behind." He started to remember and realized he had forgotten to pull it out of the throat of one of the zombies. He looked tiredly at the oncoming monsters again and said, "This is going to be a long night." Gangseo Treatment Plant. It was a low building with gray tiles. On the first floor was a waiting area with benches and tall panoramic windows. Nearby, a fire was burning because of a car that had crashed into it. A fire alarm went off in the building. Soo-young was a researcher at the Gangseo Purification Plant and lived here in the dormitory. She woke up without realizing what was going on. She looked at the time and it was 3:30 a.m. on the clock. Why was the alarm ringing at such a time? She started to get out of bed and assumed there was a malfunction in the purification system. Her bedding was blue with white stars. She stood up, yawning and stretching. She had short brown hair, neatly secured with a blue headband. She was dressed in a small white t-shirt and short shorts with stripes. Soo-young quickly put on her white sneakers and started walking downstairs. She walked up to the security station and asked the guard, "I heard the signal and went down. Did something happen to the purification system?" The guard tiredly answered her that there was nothing wrong with the purification system, just an incident at the fence. He pointed outside, toward the accident, showing her the fire. 2 employees were standing against the wall, trying to figure out the cause of the fire. The security guard assumed that someone had crashed into the fence. Soo-young became worried and asked how serious the accident was. The guard told her, "We're investigating, so we'll find out soon." Soo-young took a closer look at the fence and noticed something. It seems like a person is trying to climb over the wall. The staff outside started yelling at him, "You can't come in here. We'll call the police." The guard shook his head, tisked and said, "Honestly, it's obvious it's another drunk. If you drink, at least behave yourself." The man was about to climb over the fence, despite the prohibitions of the workers. The guard continued, "That's why they say that drunk people are like animals." The man who climbed over the fence was Kang Min-soo. He fell down heavily right into a huge puddle in front of the fence. Soo-young said, "I see. Well, it's good that the problem is not the system. Good night." She was about to leave and bowed respectfully to the guard, expressing her gratitude. Suddenly the guard noticed what was happening near the fence. Soo-young stopped and started watching too. Min-gu got up, shook himself off and beat the employees. They passed out. He took the baton from one of them and walked towards the building. The guard thought in surprise. He knocked out the guards. "He's not drunk." Min-gu had already started to approach. The guard ordered him to stop or he would open fire. Despite numerous warnings, Min-gu didn't even think of stopping. The guard raised his gun, frowned and started aiming, shouting, "Do you want to die? It's your own fault, so don't blame me later." Min-gu coldly hit him on the head with his baton before the guard could do anything. He lost consciousness as well. Soo-young was very scared, not knowing what to do now, for she didn't know Min-gu's goals. The guy looked at her, slyly narrowing his eyes and smiling. The girl's first thought was to run away as soon as possible. She tore from her seat towards the door, looking back at Min-gu. She was getting closer and closer. She was quickly climbing the stairs. She thought to herself, "We have to get out of here soon." She went inside the building and tried to close the door with the latch. However, by this time Min-gu was already at the door. He put a metal baton between the glass doors, preventing them from closing, and with that he accidentally pushed the girl. Min-gu's shoulder was still hurting very badly. The girl had a severe shortness of breath, blushed and shouted, "Please stop, you'll regret it later. Do you realize what you're doing?" She tried to close the door, pushing it forward hard by the handles. She wanted to escape what she thought was an intruder. Min-gu sat down on the wet and cold steps near the door, without removing his baton, and turned to her, trying to explain the whole situation. "Listen here. We're both going to die like this. It's better to die, though. If those monsters catch up to us, something worse than death might happen." Kang Min-soo's face was still covered in dried blood. He was terribly tired after the battle and running away from the scene. He said that if Soo-young opened the door, he wouldn't touch her and would even protect her from the approaching creatures. The girl swallowed nervously and looked at him incredulously. She didn't know what he was talking about at all and mistook him for a mental patient. She answered him, "I don't know. You break into our property and stun 3 guards. How can I trust you?" Min-gu began to rise from the ground, blood dripping from his head. The zombies climbed over the concrete fence and began to approach the purification plant. Soo-young, who noticed this, couldn't believe her eyes, and Min-gu tensed up and said, "Okay, it doesn't matter if you trust me or not. because you will still have no choice but to open the door for me." Lightning rumbled ominously in the sky, the dead men roared and almost approached the door. Soo-young let Min-gu in. Together they locked the doors and tied the handles together so as to minimize the chance of zombies getting inside. They banged on the glass door, leaving bloody smudges on it. Soo-young and Min-gu went to the kitchen, where she asked him, "Look, what kind of monsters are these anyway?" He answered her, "I don't know myself. But what is certain is that it's not some gift or surprise I brought you here." Min-gu was bandaging his hand at this time. Soo-young took offense and said that it wasn't funny and it wasn't the right time for jokes. But Min-gu really didn't know, because he himself had first met them this night, a couple hours ago. He had almost finished the cloth bandage for his wounded arm and asked Soo-young to help him bandage it. She tied the bandage around the back of his neck and said that at least he should know something about these things. He replied, "Yes, one thing I do know. These monsters don't give up. Even if I hide here, I know they won't leave no matter how long I have to wait." The thunder continued to rumble ominously, and the downpour wasn't even about to end. Min-gu noticed the kitchen knives on the table and decided to grab one for himself to replace the one he had forgotten. He rolled up his sleeves and now his tattoo was visible. It was the same as the rest of their family. His entire face and arms were covered in abrasions, bruises, and cuts. From the stress, Soo-young started nervously biting her nails and decided to go somewhere. Min-gu looked at her questioningly and asked her where she was going. The girl replied that she went to the security office. She wanted to call the police but she didn't have her phone with her. Min-gu said that was a bad idea. The girl started to get angry. "Why is that? Are you afraid or something? Do you feel guilty?" Min-gu moved closer to her and said quietly, "When they bite someone, people turn into monsters like them, you know. If you call the police, they will come here and they will be bitten immediately. Their number will instantly increase several times. Will you be able to handle that?" The girl crossed her arms over her chest and said to him, puzzled, "Then just explain everything to the police before they get here." Min-gu only grinned and answered her, "If we tell the police that these monsters with their organs hanging outwards came out of the freezer, and if you get bitten you become one too, do you think they will believe us?" The zombies didn't stop and kept banging on the glass doors, trying to break them and break through in search of fresh human flesh. Lim became even angrier and shouted, "What do you suggest we do? All you do is talk depressing nonsense." Suddenly they heard some noise from the corridor. The girl panicked badly, assuming that zombies had kicked in the doors. The guy with the calm face answered her, "No, they're reinforced glass, so before the glass rang, we would have heard the door being ripped off its hinges." The guy walked toward the kitchen exit, taking with him a baton he had stolen from the guard. He asked if there was any non-reinforced glass on the first floor that could be broken out. The girl replied that the windows in the backyard were made of regular glass, so that's what the zombies had knocked out. He offered to take her baton, saying that even a beginner could handle it. Soo-young was embarrassed, but Min-gu quickly calmed her down. "Don't worry, I'm not asking you to fight them. I'm just giving you this just in case. If you run into a monster, at least you can buy time to escape. Watch carefully, step forward with your left leg, bend your knee and swing." He was teaching her how to use the baton in case of a zombie attack in self-defense. He asked if she understood, to which Soo-young said she wasn't like him and she wouldn't be able to repeat such a thing. He held out the baton in her hands and said it was up to her. She looked shyly at Min-gu and tried to mumble something back, embarrassed. He offered to stay in the kitchen for her if she was so worried, but Soo-young refused. She wanted to go with him. Min-gu was silent for a moment and then said, "Do as you wish, just don't go too close to me." The girl said resentfully, "I won't even touch you, remember that." They started walking out of the kitchen together, which was very empty. Everything was neatly put away, with only empty containers left on the tables. They came to the stairs to the first floor. Soo-young looked at Min-gu's leg and noticed that he was limping and said, "You are very tired, maybe we can take the elevator." He flatly refused, because it would be dangerous when the elevator doors opened. A huge crowd of zombies could pile in from there and there would be nowhere to run. He also warned that from now on, no unnecessary noises were to be made. He looked menacingly at the frightened girl. She was trembling with fear. Her hands couldn't even hold the guard's baton in her hands. They began to slowly walk downstairs, carefully looking around. Min-gu thought that somehow it was too quiet. There were no lights on the landing, only the sensors flashing red lit their way. Min-gu looked around and realized that someone was approaching them. He showed a sign for the girl to stop and be as quiet as possible. He slowly looked up. His eyes were terribly tired. Just as suddenly, a zombie suddenly jumped on him, almost knocking him down and trying to grab him by his shirt. Min-gu managed to jump away from it at the last second. His heart was pounding frantically and was ready to jump out. The guy cursed loudly and thrust his knife forward, ready to attack at any moment. He looked around, trying to see what could be done in this situation and if there were any more zombies around. Min-gu gripped the handle of the kitchen knife tightly and stabbed the zombie right in the neck with it. He couldn't fight as vigorously as he had earlier on the highway, because he had injured his shoulder and his arm was bandaged, restricting his movements. Mingu stabbed at the creature time after time, splattering the dead man's blood all over the walls and stairs. Suju watched the fierce battle in shock, her eyes rounded, her pupils narrowed, and her mouth wide open in horror. She covered her face with both palms. Mingu finally finished off the zombie. It fell on the stairs. The girl asked Mingu if the monster was dead. However, he ordered her to go back to the kitchen. From his pocket, he took out a red pack of cigarettes, took one out and lit it. Inhaling the cigarette smoke, he told her that if the girl stayed, she would only be in his way and put herself in danger. He heard some kind of rumbling and realized that another mob of zombies was approaching him. He gripped the bloody knife tighter and let out a nervous chuckle. The zombies that had once been the center's guards started running at him. He exhaled the smoke irritably and said, "They won't even let me smoke."